One new thing with Yellowfin that you will see in 7.2 that you may not have seen in older versions is background execution. So what this will let you do is view all the items that are running within Yellowfin. So this is looking at more content. So we could see here we might be running 3 large reports. We can see them running in the running section. Maybe you've got Yellowfin set up to run 3 at the most, so there maybe are a couple of reports waiting to be run. So what you'll have the ability to do here is to stop those reports, is to promote those reports, or even cancel those queries. So you'll have a lot more management over what is running within Yellowfin if you do find that there's long running reports or big queries there. Another new item you will see in Yellowfin 7.2 is the plugin management. So if you are looking at setting up Yellowfin, at creating connections to new sources, so new kinds of data sources, maybe your YouTube, your LinkedIn like you see here, or even a new connection to a relational database or a big data source. This is where you can add in your plugins or your connections. Previously, this was more of a manual process outside of the Yellowfin interface. Now we've brought this in-house, so it's a whole lot easier to manage. So if I quickly jump across to show you that, what we could do is we could add a new plugin. So we could go and say, here's my new plugin. I could go and find my plugin from a particular place. Or what I could do is I could go and download this plugin from the Yellowfin marketplace and upload it there. And what this will do is it will upload all those particular files that you need, so those jar files, and that will set them all up and set up the connection for you. So you could then go and connect to something like your Twitter feed, your Google Analytics, your Hadoop cluster. So you'll have that ability to add in multiple plugins or connectors there and do that very quickly and easily. Okay, so you'll have that ability there for plugin management. Another item you'll see there is your system management. Very simply, this is just a rundown of all the configuration or settings for your environment. As you see here, this is probably a key thing that Yellowfin support will ask for. So if you do have an enhancement request or a particular bug or something similar to that, we'll often ask, can you send across your system information, so that we have a good idea for what kind of environment you're running, what kind of server, what kind of build of Yellowfin, so we can more easily address any questions or issues that you may have. Content translation, that will actually show up as well if you have Yellowfin set up with that multi-language environment. So before, when I was in the configuration section, so if I looked at my configuration and I was looking at my regional settings, if I turn on my multi-language deployment, what I can do then is I will now see a content translation. So what this will let me do is actually translate content. This process is quite simple in Yellowfin. What it will do is it will translate content for a particular item, so that could be something like a view, a report, a dashboard, and it will allow you to translate or create a translation file for those items. So as a good example, we might be translating a report. So what we would be translating is things like the column names and the name of the report and the description of the report. So a little bit of that metadata that's aligned to the report. So what you would do is you would create a translation file. This would create an Excel file that you could populate with your translations, and then what you would do is you would import that translated content back in. And that means when you've got a multi-language environment set up, when a user runs that report, it will automatically adjust it based on their language settings. So if I set up language translation for English, Dutch, and German, then depending on which of those languages the user is viewing that report with, it will be automatically updated to match that for you. So that's where you see the content translation come in. It's a little bit different to the multi-language environment. For instance, the content translation is completely based on content. It's not an automated process. It's one you can populate the details and feed back in. Whereas the actual interface, that's an automated process that's based on the browser language that you're currently working with. Okay, the next item here is your client organizations. So this is particularly useful if you're setting up a multi-tenant solution. So you might have a number of different organizations or clients that you want to log into the one Yellowfin environment, but you want them to be partitioned or separated out to make sure that no content is shared, no collaboration, no tasks, no comments are shared between those organizations, but you still have the ability to share content down from the top level, the default level, to those clients. So a good way to explain that is to look at the structure. So what you will have in Yellowfin is what we call the primary organization, or the top level, where you can manage, set up and administer, and under that you'll have each of your clients, in where you'll be able to create content here and feed it down to any client that you would need it to go to. There's a lot more configuration there that can give you some more options. So you can do things like have data source substitution, where each of these clients might be viewing the same report, but in the background Yellowfin is pointing that report at the client's own data source. So you have a little bit of extra functionality in that way. And if we look at things like the management, the client org can be set up for each client. So this is within one server instance. And what you'll be doing there is you'll be, as you're adding users, assigning them to each of the clients. So users 1, 2, and 3 might go to client A. Users 4, 5, 6 might go to client B. And as you can see here, content can be passed down to these users, which really gives you the ability to avoid duplication and allows easy content distribution. As I mentioned before, you will have added security in this way. Firstly, anything that's created within a client organization will stay there. It won't go up to the top level or the primary org, and it won't go across to any other client orgs. And this means obviously it's secured. You'll have that database substitution, or that data source substitution that I mentioned before, and you'll also have the ability to filter down things like source filters. So users are running reports and having that row-based security enabled and enacted so that you only see what you're allowed to see. So that would be the client organizations. That's a very simple item to set up. So I've turned on my client organizations here. So what I might want to do is create a new client org. I can see I've got my current org which has my users in it. So what I might do is create a new one. So maybe I'm calling this client 1. I'll just call the reference client 1 as well. And what I might want to do here is add a user. So I might have, if I look at my users, user 1 is a client org user, so I can assign them there, and that means when they log in, they might be directed straight into that client organization, or if I've given them access to multiple clients, they could have the choice. So what you'll have there is the ability to quickly and easily set up your client organizations and allocate users to those. So what I might do is just delete that one now, and I can go back to my Yellowfin instance. Okay, so we were looking at client organizations there with an example of how you can set up your client org, how you can manage that and easily add users to that particular section. The last two items we'll be looking at are the export and the import process. So with Yellowfin, you do have the option here to be able to easily migrate import and export content, and that can be done between different environments. So this is the main way to be able to do that, so the export and import process. So what you'll be able to do is to export the definitions of your content. So that could be your reports, your dashboard, your storyboards, your views, your data sources, even your images, and things like categories. You can export those and be able to import those into other environments and start using that content there. So as you see here, there'll be things like the security settings for categories that won't be exported because they are really dependent on the users that you have set up in the environment. So that is one thing you will need to double check when you move content via the export import process, is to make sure your security is set up once it has been imported into another environment. So that also applies to the source filters. That is That does work though if you do have a scheduled SQL query. So a good example of what you might see with your export is if we look at the dependency structure. So when you do go and export a piece of content, Yellowfin will actually try and help you with the dependencies. For instance, if I go and export a particular dashboard, Yellowfin will tell me which reports are in that dashboard, which subcategories, which views they're built on, which images they might be using, and allows you to add in all that content. And that will mean that when you import your dashboard, you won't be missing elements that you might need or that might be critical to that particular situation. So that will then allow you to export that out, and as you see here, that will all be exported into an XML format, so a quite light format that will hold all the definitions for you. So it's just worth noting that it won't export the data, it will export the definitions of those items. And again, on the flip side, you'll then be able to import this content. So this could be in the same environment, it could be in a different Yellowfin environment. You will want to make sure that you're exporting and importing from a similar version of Yellowfin, just to make sure everything syncs up nicely and the same functionality applies. What you will also notice is that Yellowfin will work through that dependency structure when you're importing. So you can see that each element will be displayed as you work through the import process. And then it will also let you review that at the end so that you can check which items you may or may not want to include in the import there. So even just a nice simple example of that, if I jump across to my environment and look at my administration section, I could go straight to my export here. And what I might do is say I want to export a dashboard tab, maybe my analysis dashboard, so I can say add, and what Yellowfin will do with this next step is show me all the dependencies. So I need this particular heat map, these images, these data sources, these views, and these reports, and I can then add them into my export file, and the reverse will happen again for the import. So it'll work me through this process, so it'll import my maps, my images, and it will build it up from the bottom to the top during the import process. So I can just cancel that one now, as I don't need to show you a full example of that. So that's if you're looking at the export and import process. Very useful for migrating content, but also making backups of content as well.